Hey everybody. We're going to check out Genesis 4 today in Bible with Benjamin. I'm Benjamin. Hard one to figure out, right? Give me a second here. We're going to bring it up. I'm going to read it in the English Standard Version. Let's see. I'm going to bring it up. And we've got the 25 verses here. Give me just a second. I'm going to share the screen. We're going to talk about this. We're going to mainly stay just in the text. We're going to not go off into too much intricate side topics if possible. Give me just 1 second. It says, now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And Cain, the etymology of Cain is acquired or gotten. So that's what she said. So she called him gotten because she had gotten a man from the Lord, the help of the Lord. And when it says that Adam knew Eve, his wife, this is a way that the Bible words that they had sexual relations. So it talks about a more intimate level of knowledge, sense knowledge, than just simply personal interaction. So usually when it says that they knew a man knew a woman, etc., it means that he was intimate with the woman. Is what it means. And that's the way it is with knowledge. Is there's a lot of different kinds of knowledge. Some knowledge is just knowledge that we know mentally, and then other knowledge is knowledge that we have to experience. So it's important to distinguish those. Is that when we say we want to know the Lord, we want to directly contact the Lord and feel His presence. In fact, the word for communion in the New Testament is the same word for intercourse, koinonia. And of course, I'm not making a one-to-one connection between sexual relations between a man and a woman and the relationship between the believer and God. What I'm saying is God's the designer of all of this, and so that's why we have to understand is that there's a difference between just knowing about something or interacting with something versus like truly contacting it. And this knowing is what it's talking about here. This is a deeper knowing, very intimate knowing. Adam knew Eve, his wife. She conceived and she gave credit to the Lord for this conception. So she didn't view it in a sort of a naturalistic way that we would view it, as in like, just this was the biological process. The Bible, the biblical view and the true view is that all biological processes are like the outward workings of a spiritual direction, a spiritual director, which ultimately is God, and God has angels, and sometimes some things that are judgments that He deems are beneath Him to do, He will allow the devil to carry out. I mean, for example, if somebody does something really bad, then they deserve to have something really bad done to them, then He may just turn them over to a demon, a fallen angel that wants to do these things to them and lets them do it. But anyway, she doesn't view this as just simply a biological, naturalistic process. She views it as something that God granted her the conception. And this goes along with in the previous chapters where it talks about how the ability to multiply and reproduce is a gift from God. So God's the one that's allowing this blessing to take place. Each individual conception is a blessing from God. A lot of people say, well, that's all just biology. Yeah, but God's in charge of the whole universe. It says He judges between the cattle he judges between the cattle and everything else. So um, Eve credited him with helping her to do this, to conceive. It says, and again, she bore his brother Abel. And let me check real quick here. Abel, um, it says here, I don't remember what his name means, but it sounds like it's kind of undetermined. Sounds like a lot of different people have different different interpretations. It sounds like it has to do with like breath or flowing or passing away or something like that. I don't know. Hard to say. It says now Abel was a keeper of sheep and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, and you must rule over it. This is roughly translated. Um, I am pretty sure. Let's look at the Young's literal translation before I kind of go into an explanation of this passage. Um, hold on. It says, I'm actually not sure what that's saying. Hold on. Genesis 4:7. 1 second here. I'm going to look real quick and check. Okay, so we're gonna kind of go over this real quick here. Let me bring it back to the ESV so that we can check this out. Um, so Cain brings, the fruit of the ground, and Abel brings flock with fat. Um, so one thing that's a common misconception about this passage is that people think that the reason that Cain's offering was rejected was because it wasn't an animal sacrifice. That's ridiculous. Um, there's all kinds of prescription in the law and in the Torah for grain offerings and uh, the first fruits of the ground. I mean, the very resurrection of Jesus is that he's the first fruits. Okay, so if you're going to say that fruits isn't a valid thing and that bringing first fruits isn't valid, then you're kind of nullifying the whole idea that Jesus even rose from the dead as being the first fruits of the resurrection. Because I mean, that's a reference to the feast of the first fruits or the first fruits in the feasts. Pretty sure that 1 second. Yeah, the feast of first fruits. Yeah, and so that's just totally out in left field. That's just one of those like pseudo religious, pseudo theological ideas. That's just not, it's nonsense. Um, the reason that Cain, you know, had no regard given to his offering was because he was sinning. He was in sin. It doesn't say exactly what sin he was in, but he was obviously doing some things that he knew was wrong. We don't know exactly what that was. Could have been a lot of different things. Uh, and he was really angry about it. He knew. Now, how did he know that the Lord had regard for his Abel's offering and not for his? I don't know. And maybe God was doing something where he consumed it with fire, or um, somehow he knew though, and he was very angry. So he was super bitter about this, that God had rejected him. He felt like an utter failure, utter abject failure. It says, and his face fell. So he was just like extremely downcast, extremely disappointed. And the Lord spoke to him, which apparently at this time the Lord was in pretty clear communication with people. He said, why are you angry? Why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, this passage is very difficult. A lot of people think that this is talking about saying that sin is crouching at the door, and saying that Abel is looking to you as his leader. If you will get rid of your sin, you can rule over him. That's one way that this is translated, because in the Hebrew it's difficult to read this. The other one is he might be saying that your sin is trying to take you down and you have to get control of it. There's a few different ways to translate that, but the end result is that, Cain, he was the firstborn, and he was kind of getting passed over here. And he was upset about it. So he's really angry, and God's telling him what to do. So Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. So it sounds like either he enticed Abel out into the field, or he was talking to him in the field, or they were talking together, and he just completely and utterly lost his temper and murdered him. Whether he planned this out is unclear, or whether they were just talking, I don't know. It says, then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? In other words, he tries to, he kind of does, we see a repeat of what we talked about in the previous chapter, where they try to place blame or deflect instead of owning up to what they've done. So Cain repeats this pattern of sin, which is to not own up to what you've done. And he says, I don't know what, in other words, I don't know where he is. Isn't he the one that, won't he decide where he is? Am I supposed to know where he's at all the time? That's kind of what he says. And the Lord said, what have you done? He says, the voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. In other words, he said that Abel's blood cries for vengeance from the ground. Lord, justice. Justice for me, Lord. And he says, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. So he's saying that because you polluted the earth with your brother's blood, that you the earth, you are cursed from the earth. And he says, when you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. In other words, he's telling him here that he's getting further cursed. Whereas Adam was cursed that the ground wouldn't, cooperate with him. Now Cain's really cursed. He says, you shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. In other words, he said that I can't even take this. This is too much. Cain was already downcast. Now he's just utterly destroyed. He says, behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. It's very possible that there was a lot of other people that had already been, or a lot of, he knew there was going to be more people. They may have already had children and things like that. So he knew that, he was going to live a long time probably, and he was afraid. As of yet, they'd never seen anybody die physically other than Abel, and he had killed him. So he's thinking when there's more people on the earth, they're going to kill me. He said, then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. This is really interesting, because instead of further punishing Cain, he agrees that Cain will be, he further agrees that Cain will be, killed by anybody who finds him. And he says, so I'm going to put a mark on. He says, so I'm going to repay them 7 times over. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. So probably what that's saying is that the Lord put some kind of something on his person that was immediately visible. Might have been on his face or his hands or somewhere on his body, was that he had a mark on him that basically said, don't do anything to this guy. don't do anything to him. So this kind of goes along with the idea that Cain was punished. Cain was punished for what he did, but God said enough is enough. So God didn't completely sentence him to death right here. It does seem that Cain may have just spontaneously killed his brother in a fit of rage rather than plotting it premeditated. I'd have to see if there's anything else in the Bible that confirms or denies that to make a final judgment. But it doesn't really seem to be implied here that he premeditated this. It's hard to say. But he concluded that this punishment was enough, and that the Lord said that he would not let anybody kill Cain. And he said that he would repay him 7 times over if they did. And it says, and the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. So whatever this mark was, it was some kind of a notice to anybody that found Cain that they were going to receive sevenfold judgment if they killed him. So essentially, God was saying, like, I'm the one that makes the judgment. I decided that Cain's judgment is enough, and nobody else gets to add to it. If they try to add to that judgment, then they're going to be punished by me 7 times more. So this is a pretty interesting principle, is that um, if God if God indicates that, like, judgment has been made, then you gotta settle for that. It's kind of like later on in the Bible, David kills Uriah, takes his wife Bathsheba, and and then he's called out for it, repents, is punished, and later on, Bathsheba's grandfather Ahithophel tries to essentially take vengeance on David even further, and ends up getting cursed for it, and dies, and is the precursor of Judas. He's kind of like the Old Testament Judas. So when God says that enough is enough, when God says that the punishment's been paid, you got to stop there. A lot of people do this in their lives, is they feel like they deserve a big punishment for their sins, and God has sent Jesus, who has paid the price for us through his death on the cross, and they simply just won't accept that that's enough. They're like, oh, I've gone too far, but maybe I've done more than that. You don't want to do that. You're gonna reap vengeance from the Lord when you try to add punishments beyond what he has seen fit. That's called being overmuch righteous, or there's a lot of things that you can get in trouble for doing that. So it says then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So when it says that he was cursed from the ground, and it said that he was going to be cast out and a fugitive and a wanderer and all that, kind of means from like his homeland. Um, he gets cast out from his homeland, and so he goes away east of Eden. Um, you know, east. I don't know how it appears there on the video, but we know which direction east is. And he settles in the land of Nod. I guess he called it Nod or whatever. It was a land they knew about. So apparently everybody had kind of been living in this original area, like probably like outside the Garden of Eden, little ways outside the Garden of Eden. And Cain went away from the presence of the Lord. So it seems like the Lord's presence was primarily in this homeland, and that when he settled out there, it says Cain knew his wife. She conceived and bore Enoch. This is not the same Enoch who's translated. This is not the same Enoch of the godly line of Seth. This is Cain's Enoch. And he knew his wife. Now, a lot of people are going to bring up who was Cain's wife and where did she come from. They're going to be like, oh, we got you now, Christians. You're promoting incest. Cain's wife was obviously either his sister or his niece. And either him or Abel, or maybe both, had married a sister. They're not included in the genealogy because women usually aren't reckoned in the genealogies in the Old Testament. So he married his sister, And you say, well, that's incest. It's like, well, the only real reason that we really have much definition of incest is mainly because of the Bible. Um, so the Bible's basically where we get our standard that incest is wrong. Within the Bible, internally, um, the forbiddance on incest doesn't include like a biological necessity for the survival of the human race. It's something that's forbidden under normal circumstances. So this whole idea that like the Bible's contradicting itself is just kind of it's not really relevant. There probably was fewer genetic penalties at this point. God may have designed the world to where um, man could marry his sister and reproduce at this stage. And by the time of the Torah being given, it was apparently not designed to be that way then. So we see later on in different places that people do marry um, relatives, and it's allowed because none of the rules in the Bible were ever intended to be like a computer code. They weren't intended to be like, this rule is this way. It's never done any different under any circumstances ever. Um, the rules have a purpose, and the purpose is to prevent bad outcomes. But if the outcome is so egregiously bad by keeping the rule that it defeats the purpose of the rule, then the rule just has to be bypassed. So, for whatever reason, at this point, it would certainly have been considered more egregious for humanity to have not continued than it would have been for uh, them to marry their sisters. Um, which, again, the big standard that we've got of not marrying a sister mostly comes from the Bible itself anyway. So the Bible's the one that tells us not to do that. And it makes it pretty clear here, though, that this is an exception. This is one of those situations where um, it was more favorable to do so than to not do so. So, you know, obviously, I'm not pro incest, I'm anti incest. But in answering these questions within the Bible, there's just no way around this. It was his sister. It was one of his sisters, and he was already married to her before this all happened. One second. Says Cain knew his wife conceived, she bore Enoch. When he built a city, so Cain built a city, and he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methujael, and Methujael fathered Lamech. And this Lamech is not the Lamech that's the father of the Noah. This is a different Lamech. Okay, so this is Cain's Lamech. So Lamech was, let's see, Cain, Enoch, Irad, Methujael. So he was, I think, the third great grandson of Cain. And Lamech here, it says, and Lamech took two wives. We don't really know whether Lamech was it's often said Lamech was the first person to have more than one wife. We don't really know that. We don't know that there wasn't another person before him or somebody in Adam's line or any of that. We just know that for some reason it's really kind of strange because for some reason it wants to tell us that Lamech took two wives and it wants to tell us that their names, which is really unusual. So there's probably some kind of a significance to this. He could have been the first person to take two wives or more, but it doesn't actually say that. It just says he had two wives and it tells us who they were. So they were apparently somebody famous. This was a famous story and has some significance because God intended for it to be in the scriptures. So it's here, and it says one of his wives bore a son named Jabal. It says he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. So this Jabal apparently invented like tents He invented things like the nomadic life, and he invented like herding livestock. And his brother's name was Jubal. So one's was Jabal, and the other's name was Jubal. It says his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. So apparently, his brother Jubal invented lyre and pipe playing. So that's what where he comes from, and that may be why it signifies his two wives here. A lot of people are like, "Oh, it's showing us that Cain's line invented polygyny or polygamy or whatever." That's not really what's going on here. There's some significance to these two wives, and there's some significance to all of their um, descendants. I think it's like he's a historically significant figure. I don't think that there's really any indication in this passage that there's a criticism of his wives or him having two wives any more than there is a criticism of um, tents and livestock and lyre and pipe. And it says Zillah also bore Tubal Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. So bronze and metal workers, um, all come from this. So Lamech was really a historically important figure, um, because he had these two wives that had these specific children that apparently were like incredibly inventive and invented a lot of stuff, a lot of amazing stuff that we have in the world today. So, and for some reason it specifies his sister, which is odd. It just says the sister of Tubal Cain was Naamah, which is unusual. Um, and so this whole thing here, the reason that this Lamech is mentioned really is because he was a historically significant figure. And there's some people are going to say, oh, the devil, he's the originator of music, or maybe metalworking and piping is, wrong because it came from Cain, or you know, him having two wives was a sin because it's Cain's line. It's like all of that's just not really any part of the text. None of that has anything to do with the text. This is a historically significant figure. He had two wives. Each of the wives bear specific people. And I don't know why his sister's mentioned, but hey. And Lamech said to his wives, so this is another thing that Lamech did, um, which we don't really know whether he actually was the next person to kill somebody, or whether, again, this is some prophetically, historically significant thing that God decided to put in here for our understanding. It kind of seems implied in the text that maybe he was the first person to kill somebody since Cain. But we don't know for sure. This could just be like some prophetic meaning to this. It says Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. So Lamech is kind of like, apparently had this incident where some young man attacked him and he killed him. And he's saying that if Cain killed Abel unjustly and I was attacked, then surely I'm not going to be punished for this. I mean, surely I'm innocent. He's like, if Cain's going to get sevenfold vengeance after he murdered Abel, then I was defending myself, self-defense. It says I'll definitely be avenged 77-fold. I'll be avenged 10 times, 11 times what 77 two sevens. He kind of like he's emphasizing like the significance. And it says, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth, which I think means appointed. And it says, for she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. So interestingly, it's sometimes the men name the child, and then other times the women name the child. And in this case, it appeared that Eve named both of these, all the children actually. Um, or at least Cain and Seth. And his name was Enosh. Enosh means, let me check real fast. It means man. Yeah, it means man or mortal. And this is one of the most significant mistranslated scriptures in the Bible, because there's an entire theological thing that revolves around this passage. It says, at that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. Now, if we look in the Young's literal, which is usually much better for understanding what the passage actually says, it's going to say, he says, then a beginning was made of preaching in the name of Jehovah. Okay. So this is a very difficult passage to translate in English. And in fact, if we look at the, one second. We look at this right here in the Bible Hub, in the parallel. One second. If we look at this in the parallel, we're going to see that there's a lot of different. We see men begin to call upon the name of the Lord. Men began to call on Yahweh's name. Beginning was made of preaching. And then this one here, Smith's literal translation, it says, then it was begun to call in the name of Jehovah. So he's translating it where it was like, what the heck are we even translating here? So let's look at what they're working with, which is in the interlinear. And it says, then began men to call on the name of Yahweh. Okay. Now, it's kind of hard to explain this right here without going into a lot of detail. But this right here, some of these commentaries are going to explain it. They're going to kind of go over this. This one here is pretty accurate. It says, and to Seth was born a son called Enos, which in the general name for all men, and speaks the weakness, frailty, and misery of man's state. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. It says, doubtless God's name was called upon before, but now, first, the worshippers of God began to do more in religion than they had done, perhaps not more than they had been done at first, but more than had been done since the defection of Cain. Now men began to worship God, not only in their causes and families, but in public and solemn assemblies. Second, the worshippers of God began to distinguish themselves, so the margin reads it, then began men to be called by the name of the Lord, or to call themselves by it. Okay. And now Cain and those that had deserted religion had built a city and began to declare for irreligion and called themselves the sons of men. Those that adhered to God began to declare for him and his worship and called themselves the sons of God. There is, when you read the Hebrew, you can actually see they began to call upon themselves, then began to call on the name of Yahweh. And the way that it kind of reads, there's a way to read this where it kind of says, then men began to call on themselves Yahweh's name. So that goes to another place later where in Genesis 6, it talks about the sons of God and the sons of men, daughters of men. And that's pretty significant because this changes a whole theology from, the original big sin that caused the flood was women having sex with angels, to it was an intermarriage between the godless and the godly humans. And, the kind of breaking the commandment of be not unequally yoked and those such things. But this is a very, very difficult passage to translate because of the way Hebrew works. And so this has kind of been lost. The understanding of this has become a little confused, but it should read, at that time, men began to call themselves by the name of the Lord, to say, I'm of God. That's what it's supposed to say. In those days, men began to call themselves the sons of God. That's what it's really saying. Okay, I'm going to chapter 5. We're just going to keep reading this. We're going to just go through Genesis 4 and 5 because 5 is just a genealogical passage. There's a few little takeaways from 5, but I'll just go through it real quick and tack it on with 4. Um, it says, "This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth." Now, hold on one second. Let me show you one thing real quick. Um, this here, where it says male and female, he created them and he blessed them and called them Adam. That's what it says there. This is kind of the original incident of like the woman being called by the man's name. So the woman here is counted with the man. So she has her own name, which is Eve, but she's counted as Adam. So they're one, but the man gets the headship. The name is the man's name. It says, when Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. One second, folks, just a second here. It says, when Seth had lived... Hello?
Hey,
Hey, I was getting ready to call you.
are you still want me to do something with you today? Because we're not going to the cemetery.
Oh, you're not going? Okay. Do you want to
No,
come to...
because my dad's battery died
Oh,
in the middle of the procession, so we're stuck at the funeral home right now.
oh, wow, okay. Huh. Oh, wow. I see. Yeah, for sure. You want to come to do it? Come to my uncle's house with me?
Yeah, whenever we get back home, which I'm having to cut her up here now to jump the car. Let me go home and change and get my glasses fixed, and I'll be up to your house, okay?
Okay. What time do you think you'll get here?
It just depends whenever I get home.
Okay. Well, call me before you leave.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
what time is the thing?
4.
Oh, I'll be home before then. The funeral home's just down the street from my house.
Okay.
All right.
All right. See you then.
All right.
Love you.
All right. Love you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So we see that, it's talking about these extremely long lifespans. And a lot of people are like, oh, that's crazy. The Bible's wild. It's just prediction. Oh, it's just projection. This crazy world where all this lifespans. If there was an ozone layer or a frozen ocean around the Earth, it would block out lots of the rays. It would create a lot of ecological and barometric effects that don't exist anymore. So there's really no way to observe any of this happening anymore. And there's no way to relate it to the old world. Peter talks about how the world that was perished. So whatever allowed for him to live that long is not able to be replicated. It's a different ecological system. So apparently in this ecological system, they were able to live a lot longer. Some people say, well, maybe the years were different lengths, or maybe it was, no, it's talking about that he lived 930 years. Adam may have been bigger. He may have been a bigger guy. He may have been 10 feet tall. He lived to be 930 years, whatever's going on. It was not the same thing. And so this right here shows that there wasn't like a trillion years in between, Adam having Cain and then Cain, they didn't live there for millions of years or any of that kind of stuff, in case anybody ever thought that. Because the incident with Cain and Abel had already happened. And at some point after this, Adam was 130 years old and he produced Seth. And yeah, again, about the length of the years, I mean, it's just a different ecological system, so that's just the way it is. It's just different world, same physical location, but such a different ecological system that it might as well have been a different world, and people just lived longer then. It says when Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. So Enosh was born 235 years after the creation. It says Seth lived after he fathered Enosh 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Now, keep in mind, one thing to note is that these were not the only people that were around during this time period. There was plenty of other men and women and things like that. Probably Cain and Abel had already had children, sons and daughters. Probably Abel had sons and daughters. This was not. This is a genealogical line to Noah, is what this is describing. So this is tracing Noah's ancestry. Okay, it actually doesn't even say. Let me check something real quick here. So this was Adam's next son with Eve. Okay, there's a lot of other possibilities that could have been going on here. Abel could have had sons and daughters. They could have already been reproducing. Wild far out theory, Adam could have had additional wives. There's a lot of other things that could have happened. But whatever's going on, what we know for sure is that this was Adam's next son with Eve. When I say Adam could have had additional wives, I mean he could have married a descendant, or something could have happened. We don't know. There's a lot of speculative stuff. We don't know that this could have just been the next man, period. Or it could have been Abel had already had sons and daughters, and they were reproducing, and there was a lot of people, and because it talks about here when it said in the previous chapter that in his days men began to call upon the name of the Lord. It kind of indicates there was a significant number of other men besides just Adam has Seth, and then Seth has Enosh, and there's Adam, Seth, and Enosh are chilling, and there was more. Somehow there was more going on. They were reproducing a lot more people and it wasn't different races of people that all came from different men and women that were created. It was all coming from Adam, but the exact order of how it happened is totally speculative. Because like I'm saying, Adam had Eve with him, and the Cain had killed Abel, and then the next 130 years after they had been created, Eve had Seth. Actually, we don't know that Abel didn't have children, and they were reproducing, and there was a whole flock of people from Abel. Abel got killed, but we don't really know what he did before he got killed. It does seem that Cain didn't have any children until after he had killed Abel and had fled. But we just don't really know. We don't really know. We know, though, that this was Adam's next child with Eve. And and when Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. Again, there could have been any combination of peoples, from any of the other progenitors. Seth lived after he fathered Enosh 807 years. He had other sons and daughters. So, and he says, in the days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So, we're not given any details on these other sons and daughters because the line for Noah is just coming through that. I personally lean away from the idea that Adam had any additional wives that he was reproducing with, but it's possible. Probably not. Speculative. It doesn't specify that. But when Enosh had lived 90 years, he fathered Kenan. Enosh lived after he fathered Kenan 815 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he fathered Mahalalel. Kenan lived after he fathered Mahalalel 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he fathered Jared. Mahalalel lived after he fathered Jared 830 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. When Jared had lived 962 years, he fathered Enoch. This is Adam's Enoch, the Enoch of the line of Seth. Jared lived after he fathered Enoch 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Methuselah's name means when he dies, it shall come. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So Enoch is the only man in the old world that didn't die. So Enoch didn't die. So he was just translated by God. He was taken to heaven, and somehow he was just whisked away. He was just, he's there. Or he was taken away like Elijah or something. Something happened where he was the exception. He walked with God. And it says he pleased God in the Septuagint. So he pleased God, and he says he was not, for God took him. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he fathered Lamech. Methuselah lived after he fathered Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. So this is the other Lamech. This is Adam's Lamech. So thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Now, a lot of people say Methuselah is the oldest man that ever lived. Methuselah is the oldest person that's recorded in the Bible. It is possible that there were other people who lived longer than anybody on this list, but they are not a part of this genealogy. So Methuselah is the oldest known person, and he may be the oldest person, period, but these long lifespans were pretty conventional for back then. It says when Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, which means rest, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Lamech lived after he fathered Noah 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So he fathered them at some point after he was 500. I do not believe this actually literally means they were triplets. I might have to look into this a little bit further to understand this. There's a common and very cool, in a lot of ways, very neat thing where if you translate the names of all of these patriarchs, old world patriarchs, that they spell out a prophecy. I'm going to show you. Let me show it to you real quick here. We'll look at this here. So this right here, it says the genealogy from Adam to Noah. It says Adam equals man, Seth equals appointed, mortal, sorrow, the blessed God shall come down teaching, his death shall bring the despairing rest. This is a really cool thing, and it's been used to really impress a lot of people, but without going into it in a lot of detail. I'm usually very supportive of anything that increases somebody's faith, and I can't really go into all the details about this right now. You'd kind of have to study this out. This is kind of like a side topic for like a more in-depth discussion on the Hebrew. There's really not a lot of reason to think that this is actually what's going on. These translations they're very rough. They're very rough. When you look at the meanings of these names, it's really not quite so clear cut as that makes it out to be. That's not something that I would really particularly use as an argument for supporting Jesus as the Lord. And I think there's a lot better. There's a lot better verses and prophecies to use. That's a very cryptic, like very vague. The Hebrew's not quite so clear. I wouldn't recommend someone using that as a central argument for uh, Jesus or his divinity or his resurrection, death, etc. Um, if it inspires you, then so be it. I'm not going to try to take that away from anybody, but I'd personally lean against that. That's really actually in the text. So we've got a lot of stuff that does explicitly mention Jesus and does explicitly give us details about him. I just don't think this is one of them. And if you kind of dig into the Hebrew words and stuff, it's just not that, it's not as convincing as kind of like when it's presented in these sort of apologetics ways. Like I said, there's plenty of stuff that is very convincing about Jesus. I just don't think this is I think this is kind of like, this is one of those, this is kind of like the spear that when you lean on it, it kind of pierces your own hand when you try to use it to convert an unbeliever and stuff. I think this is not reliable as a prophecy. But anyway, just a little close on Genesis 5 here is Genesis 5 is like just kind of chronologically bridging us from the Cain and Abel fall of the garden incident. And it's just kind of chronologically bridging us to Noah. That's where it's taking us to. It's taking us to Noah and the flood. And there's not a lot of details given here. There's not a lot of serious in-depth stuff. There's not a lot of information about these particular characters. There does seem to be a tendency amongst to indicate that these particular characters were righteous. Partially because we know that Enosh in his days, everybody began to call themselves by the name of the Lord. Seth doesn't say he went bad, so considering that he was the replacement for Cain, it kind of implies that he was good. We don't really have anything about Kenan, Mahalalel, or Jared. We know Enoch was good. Methuselah, it seemed like the world was spared from being flooded until the day he died, or the year he died, or whatever. Kind of implies that he was a godly figure. Lamech, I mean, we really don't have much, but he does. It does seem like that he's prophesying and prophetically naming Noah, and he did also live an interesting year, 777 years, which that's not really an indicator of righteousness or anything, but it is interesting. Might not have any significance, but it's kind of, it looks good. 3 sevens, Noah's father. It's pretty nice. And then we got Shem, Ham, Japheth. So this is kind of these are the guys that's the beginning of our version of the world with the ecology that we live in now. Post flood is this guy's the father, and these guys are the other people that are born in the old world, the 3. So 5 really doesn't have a lot of significance other than just giving us a general idea of what was going on, showing us the actual line of Noah, and really giving us a precise dating of the flood. So the flood can be dated by adding up these genealogies, and the flood would come out to be 1656 years after creation, I believe it is. I'm looking at that there, the timeline. Yeah, so it would be like 1656 years or 2300 to 2400 years before Christ. And that's pretty much the whole significance of chapter 5. So we'll move on to chapter 6, where we kind of get back to story and things like that. We'll move on to that next. So it's the close of this. And thanks for watching, and tune in to the next one. Bless.